Hello, everybody. Welcome again. My name is Eshban Kwesiga from the Global Fund for Community Foundations. I'm based here in Kampala, Uganda. Um, we had an earlier conversation similar to this earlier in the day for our colleagues on the eastern side of the globe. And I should also perhaps just start off by saying that this is one of our various conversations in a series of conversations on measuring what matters that started some years ago, as well as another conversation that we had at the summit in Bogotá last year in December. I should start off by saying that we are having these conversations at a time when increasingly in the system or in the sector, there's an acknowledgement that a lot of what gets measured in the international development system is very much defined by funders. And for a long time, we have measured in a manner that elevates how funders define success, usually at the expense of how communities define their success. I was saying earlier in the day that in the early years of my career, I'd been socialized in the human rights, social justice sector. And thinking about it now, it's always odd that a lot of that work, which is around rights and justice, is very much there are moments of it when it's measured by number of meetings held. And back then, even though it felt a bit odd and strange, I never had the language or even the politics to articulate that tension and that awkwardness of measuring human rights work based on, number of meetings held, how many, say, women are in the room, etc. And now, increasingly, I think as the sector acknowledges that measurement is indeed political and that this conversation is growing with various organizations around the world paving their own path and attempting to measure differently. In the course of this conversation, in the course of this webinar, we're going to hear some stories from our colleagues in Brazil and in Kenya, who in a sense have started the work to build or to put together the building blocks of measuring differently. And sometimes when we come to these meetings, people are keen to know, is this the tool that's going to end all tools? And really, that's not the purpose of what these meetings are supposed to. What we want to do is not to offer some kind of standard that anyone can take and replicate in their own organization, but rather inspiration or some collective courage for us to start to measure differently and start to measure what matters to us. In a nutshell, that's what we are here to talk about. Welcome again. And over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Eshban. Hello, everybody. Well, we are reaching from the far reaches of the East. We've got colleagues joining us from Indonesia who are staying up late for round 2, and plenty of colleagues joining from the Americas. So welcome, everybody. We're going to be doing this session in English and in Portuguese. Yes, our colleague from Brazil will speak in Portuguese. So as Eshban has already suggested, if you'll need translation, then click on the globe and you will get English, Spanish, or Portuguese. As Eshban also said, this is the second time, this is round 2 of this conversation, which we ran a few hours earlier with a similar, actually, spookily, we're at 85 participants. We were 86 this morning. So we're doing well in terms of participation. And I think we just have to look around. Oh, my cat loves afternoon Zoom meetings. So you'll just have to forgive Rosa for joining in. She's very interested in measurement as well. Oh, move. Yes, so the purpose of this is not, as Eshban said, is to come up with the answers, but actually the fact of how many people are interested in this topic is a sign that a sense that it really feels like it's time to acknowledge the fact that not only can we do better in around the question of measurement and learning and who gets to determine what gets measured, but actually I think an acknowledgement that new ways of measuring are emerging, and they're often emerging from the ground up, from the logic of community upwards. And so I think the sense that between us, coalition of the willing, we actually are incredibly well positioned to start thinking about really lending meaning in its truest sense to our work. This session builds off one of the bucket sessions that was held at the Shift the Power Summit in Bogotá, which was extremely well attended. And again, the sort of energy of the experience of how people were looking at the question of measurement in the communities that they serve was really incredibly sort of vibrant and dynamic, and people coming out with all sorts of different strategies for collective organizing, shared learning, peer-to-peer exchanges, and on all of that. So we're going to start off by with a little question to see how you're feeling about the vexed question of measurement on this Thursday in April. Wendy, would you mind launching the poll? It's a very simple question. The principal purpose of the current system of measurement is designed to satisfy the needs of donors, communities. Right, about 50 people have responded. Just leave it another second. Great, let's end the poll there and see what folks are saying. So I think most people, a large proportion, believe that the current system is really designed for donors and perhaps less so from communities. Now, and I thank you for everyone for responding to that. Now, obviously, we understand that this work is not only about simple binaries, it's about complexity too. Did we share the results? I'm getting it popping up again. There we go. You can see 94% thought it was in favor of donors, 6% in favor of communities. Sorry, I'm getting a message from Zoom telling me I appear to be speaking Portuguese. I think I can guarantee that I'm not. Let me just tell Zoom that I'm not. Oh, there's so much happening today at my desk. So we'd like to start really with you. Anyone want to share in English, Spanish, or Portuguese, and we'll flip into translation as we need to, about how you're feeling, how you're coming to this conversation around measurement, what you're seeing, something you want to share, why you think people voted so much on the side that current measurement systems are geared towards donors. But I invite anyone to raise their hand and share with colleagues just to get us started. And if no one raises their hand, then I might just select somebody to invite to share. But there was quite a strong message from this group that you have feelings about this issue. And the title of this session, Measurement is Political, I think we want to unpack a little bit. So would anyone like to share with colleagues about how they're feeling about the current measurement system, perhaps in their own organization, or that they see themselves as part of or having to respond to? Okay. Let me see, I'm going to come looking for somebody in a minute if no one raises their hand.
I can share.
No. Oh, no. So that was, I can see Nora's raised her hand. Somebody else said they'll share. Who was that?
It was me, Amanda.
Amanda, there you go. You haven't got your camera on, so you're low down on my screen. So do you want to switch your camera on, introduce yourself, and tell us how you're feeling, and then we'll come to Nora.
I'm not going to switch my camera on because I am kind of in the middle of, I'm not in my office currently, but
Okay.
but yeah, I'm at USAID. The way I kind of feel about our current measurement system is that either is that we are hyper focused on indicators and we need to be less focused on indicators because they have such limited utility, both for accountability and for learning, in telling us how our programs are doing. I think when they're at the output level, we all know that that might be useful for management purposes, but doesn't get us a whole lot beyond that usually. And then when we're measuring them at the outcome level, they just tend to either be extremely expensive to measure, might need something like a large scale survey, or they are just not well defined. We might have something like, like level of trust in government. And we're just not defining that well. And there are things that would just be so much better measured through qualitative data or stakeholder feedback. And at least at USAID, we don't often have the processes and resources and organizational culture, I think, to be incorporating that in every activity.
Amanda, thank you, not only for being the first person to speak, but also being the first person to speak after 96% of the people on the call have said, that our current system is tilted towards donors. And thirdly, for naming that tension between are we talking about accountability or are we talking about learning? Are we talking about how money got used, or are we talking about how social change happens? And I think, being able to kind of tease those things apart, accountability to whom, learning for what, I think you've really kind of laid out the parameters of the tensions of a thing that gets mashed together into various acronyms as meal, whatever you like to call it. So thank you for kicking us off. We're going to turn now to a different part of the world, to Palestine. Noor is joining us from Dahlia Association. Noor, over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know what's the time zone, but what I would like to add here is it's very similar. It's that what we're reporting on are more of indicators of the numbers achieved. But what we really need to measure is the impact and the influence we're doing in our communities. And this is the hardest actually to measure. But I believe this needs to be our focus, more of evaluation of what we did right, wrong, and then how we can take learnings from there that can benefit more our communities rather than reporting numbers only for donor purposes or for and this is part of shifting the power. The power needs to be in the hands of our communities rather than spending our time for reporting to donors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noor. And I'm sure many of us, all of us on this call, will be sending you warmth and solidarity at these very difficult times. And the fact that Dahlia Association is continuing to do your work, working with engaging local communities in driving their own development. So sending you all the best on that front. And again, I think that what Noor's mentioned, that this is really about kind of deep changes at a community level, mindset shifts, real lasting impacts that mean something to the people involved. And I think that came up very much on this morning's call, is the sense that we're busily providing a machine with numbers, but actually most people's work at the community level is informed by what they see and hear and listen. But in a sense, the system often doesn't ask for that kind of insight. It's not encouraging us to share these kinds of stories. Would anyone else like to share? Anyone, Spanish speaker, Portuguese speaker, who'd like to be bold and jump in to share your experiences? You're a bigger group, but you are a shyer group than this morning's group. So I'm just saying, if you wanted to step up, now would be the time. That's okay. Okay. Telefa, welcome. Thank you. Oh, we've got two people lined up. Wonderful. Let's start with you.
Hi, Gray. I just wanted to make a comment that the way donors require measurement right now really doesn't get at the complexity of it all and isn't really related to systems level change. And, they don't even really understand systems level change. And there aren't a whole lot of really good options out there to measure systems level change. And that's what we're all striving for. So I keep hoping that they'll catch up.
Thanks, Letha. Really good point. And often we are, those of us who report to donors can end up being complicit in providing the things that we think donors want. we become part of the system, we play the system, when, you know, the purpose of our work, most of us in this field, is around, you know, the normative purpose of what our development work is really about. And it's not just about measuring things just for the sake of it. Okay, I've got 3 hands up, so we'll hear from the 3 of you, and then we will turn to our first contribution, which will be Yaz joining us from Brazil. So let me turn to you first, Sue. What would you like to, feel free to introduce yourself and switch your camera on if you like.
Hi everyone. My name is Suzanne Su Muhereza. I'm with the UNDP Strategic Innovation Unit. Well, it's really jarring when I can see my face. I'm going to mute that. So the innovation unit is doing some work around measuring system change and developing a new practice of MEL that really looks at the portfolio level and trying to support bring practitioners together to test new ways to measure systems change, which is not just slow, but big and long. So happy to engage with anyone that's involved with that. The one note I wanted to add was on, you know, we're talking a little bit about donors and measuring numbers and looking at more horizontal measurement and looking at measuring intangible elements of the interventions that we do in communities. But I've been reading a little bit of Toby Lowe's work. Toby Lowe works with the Center for Public Impact. I think it's UK based, and he has some interesting thinking around how we approach outcomes in general. And he says that we need to think about how outcomes actually reflect in real life and question the idea that donors can buy outcomes and that one organization or a group of organizations can deliver outcomes in the way that we are thinking about them in the MEL practice. So that's something that I've been ruminating on in terms of, if we're thinking about systems change, the outcomes that actually reflect in real life in the lives of individuals are based on many factors and not just the intervention of 1 or 2 organizations working in communities. So that's something that I've been noodling on, and I wanted to put that out there as well. Beyond, it's not just about not looking at numbers, but really looking at what kind of outcomes we value and whether the outcomes we can measure are the outcomes that matter, I guess, in the language of GCSF.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sue, and thank you for switching your camera on. I just did a quick Google, and I think this is the chap you're talking about. So I've just posted that in the chat. But I think, you know, I'm a baker, and I often feel like development work is like baking a cake. It's the combination of all the different ingredients that actually bakes the cake. And when a donor thinks they've contributed the eggs and say, but what did my eggs buy? The eggs only worked in the context of the cake, right? And somehow this idea, but what was the bit that I bought, is sort of, you know, a ludicrous question in that sense. To thank you for sharing with us, Sue. Let's hear from Ricardo, who's in Costa Rica. Nice to see you, Ricardo. Ricardo would join.
Hi, Jenny. Can I intervene in Spanish?
Yes, please do. And if you're not a Spanish speaker and you want to hear Ricardo in Spanish, just make sure you've clicked on the globe and pressed the English button or the Portuguese button if you're a Portuguese speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Sí, bueno, agradecer primero el espacio. Creo que de 2, 3 intervenciones previas, ahí he estado tomando nota con frases bastante poderosas. Creo que desde el punto de vista de fondos comunitarios, como el que represento, tenemos, y voy a tratar de hablar despacio para ayudar a la interpretación, tenemos 2 vertientes, una que es una relación directa con donantes y una relación directa con los grupos de base, que son los que ejecutan proyectos en el territorio. Entonces, me llamó la atención digamos, la encuesta del inicio, porque es cierto, mucho responde de las políticas de medición hacia los donantes. pero no tanto hacia la comunidad. Y en el caso de nosotros, creo que esa disyuntiva o esa pregunta de si lo hacemos por accountability o por transparencia, rendición de cuentas, y si lo hacemos por aprendizaje, mejora continua y demás, al menos desde nuestra perspectiva son como hasta complementarias, deberían ser, digamos, debería haber sinergia, pues, y creo que al menos desde nuestra posición, mucho va por trabajar con los grupos de base en los territorios para aplicar esa mejora continua, desarrollar esa confianza, que se pueda experimentar, fallar y ajustar de manera rápida, que esos aprendizajes queden, eh, y a partir de eso también pues exponer eso a los donantes y, y defender, digamos, que los típicos indicadores de desempeño a veces se quedan cortos, como comentaron las colegas recientemente. Entonces, en esencia eso, que tenemos dos vertientes, algunas de las organizaciones o muchas, y que podemos ir trabajando en una para que vaya nutriendo la otra y viceversa. Eso sería. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, and for bringing in that extra layer of nuance there, in that some organizations on this call at this meeting, donors for them are both those big chilly bureaucracies on the other side of the world, and people in the community. So we also get caught in this donor beneficiary dichotomy, but actually, if you're starting to see local contributions from within the community, then there's a whole other different type of donor, which equates to community too. So thank you for bringing that in. Catalina, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Jenny. Yes, well, I agree with everything that has been said, but I think there's an additional thing to consider in the case of our projects. We have projects funded by the US government, but which are implemented through an NGO, a US-based NGO, but in Colombia. Sorry, I'm in Colombia. So we have like a dual difficulty, which is we have to be following the budget, the work plan, everything that is set up by the NGO, who's not here. And we, at the same time, we are adapting with our communities and everything to the new needs, to all the complexity of the project. And it's very difficult because maybe our donor is very flexible. They have a new mail guide, which is completely based on complexity, flexibility, learning from experience. So I think it's really fantastic. It's from the US Department of Labor, if you want to look at it. I think it's really good. But then we have in the middle the NGO for whom we actually work. And they are more worried about fulfilling the budget, the work plan, doing what we need to do and spending the money at the right time on what we said. So it's very difficult. That makes it difficult to adapt. If we would, it's not possible. I know that the system works in that way in tiers, but if we would be able to adapt from what our mail guide says, immediately the project, adapt the project to that without having to go through the NGO and the budgets and all this bureaucratic stuff, probably that would be better. But that would have to change the whole system, no? I would have to think, how do we do that?
Thanks, Catalina. Well, I think there are plenty on this call who believe that we could change the whole system, and indeed should, because I think the point you're making, and I think we know that there are sort of people who get it, people who have the ideas, the creativity in different parts of the system. Just being in a particular part of the system doesn't mean you have a particular wisdom. But the power dynamics, the patterns of how development is done, is that the further down the chain you go, the less learning or change seems to matter over things like compliance and accountability. And so the sort of trust erodes the more contracts there are along the way. And so how do we kind of reconnect those dots around change on the ground and an understanding of change which has been iterated within other spaces so they actually start to meet and talk to each other rather than get eroded along the way? So thank you for that. Alex, love to hear from you, and then we're going to hear from Yaz in Brazil. So, Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll keep it short. I usually speak in English in these spaces, but I'm so excited about the interpretation, so I'm going to speak in Portuguese instead. Então, eu sou cofundadora de uma empresa social chamada The Equity Index, ou Índice de Equidade, sediada aqui no Reino Unido. E para nós acreditamos que a maioria dos esforços de medição no setor se concentra em projetos, intervenções, programas em países específicos, na maioria das vezes no sul global. Mas a gente acredita que também precisamos medir as formas de trabalhar das organizações no norte global, tanto de uma perspectiva interna quanto externa. Por exemplo, quão equitativas são as suas práticas? Elas estão, de fato, transferindo poder e recursos para os atores do sul global? Isso nunca parece ser incluído nos esforços e nas conversas de medição, e nós achamos que isso também é importante. Obrigada.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. Nice to see the Portuguese-speaking version of Alex as well. The reminder that we can all play many roles in life. Let's turn to you now, Yaz. Yasmin Moraes, who's joining us from Comwa in Brazil. We have traveled on a journey together with Comwa over the years, starting to think about the issues of measurement and learning. Would you like to tell us a bit about Comwa and how you have sort of come into this conversation around measurement and its political nature? So yes, please share with us.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to also switch to Portuguese to take advantage of the translation in this beautiful, inclusive space. Então, pessoal, eu me chamo Yasmin, estou com a Rede Comoá. Nós somos uma rede brasileira de fundos e fundações comunitárias para a justiça socioambiental, que mobilizam recursos de fontes diversas para doar para as bases, para os territórios, para as comunidades lutando por desenvolvimento comunitário, por direitos humanos, justiça socioambiental. É muito bom ver vários membros da rede aqui presentes, de vários fundos diferentes. Muito bom ver também algumas pessoas do programa Saberes, que é o nosso programa de produção de conhecimento a partir de lideranças comunitárias. Agradeço tudo que todo mundo já falou até aqui. Acho que me identifico com muitas angústias, questionamentos, ideias, né, desejos. E queria falar um pouquinho do por que a gente vê medição, monitoramento, avaliação e todos esses processos como algo político e contar um pouco da nossa experiência na Rede Comoá com relação a como a gente tem olhado para o engajamento dos membros dentro da rede, que é um âmbito em que a gente tem questionado bastante, né, a questão do monitoramento e avaliação. Então, como todo mundo já falou aqui, tem uma incompatibilidade muito clara entre o que os doadores muitas vezes nos pedem e o que as comunidades, as nossas organizações e as nossas equipes valorizam em termos dos indicadores que a gente mede, como a gente mede também, né? E aí, normalmente, esse desafio vem por uma forma muito linear e lógica de pensar como o nosso trabalho funciona, como o impacto que a gente busca ter nas comunidades funciona, e isso muitas vezes requer uma super simplificação dos modelos e das nossas narrativas e de como a gente faz o nosso trabalho. Acho que a Thalita falou um pouco sobre isso também. E acaba não permitindo tanto uma visão mais ampla, complexa e até mais colaborativa de como a gente olha para esses indicadores, né? Então, repensar isso é político, porque justamente questiona essa relação de poder que é refletida no que nós medimos e em como nós medimos dentro das nossas organizações. Repensar como a gente sempre fez as coisas, repensar esses modelos que são coloniais, que são muitas vezes capitalistas, modelos de escala, modelos de números, modelos impostos, modelos que buscam só extrair informações sem necessariamente dar nenhum retorno ou relevância para as comunidades ou para as organizações, modelos que são distantes das comunidades, modelos complexos demais, que exigem muita adaptação das organizações muitas vezes, né? Então é político porque a gente está questionando isso, que é uma questão dentro do nosso setor bastante estrutural, né? Então, necessariamente a gente busca mexer com essas estruturas de poder dentro do setor, e é por isso que tem esse caráter político, né? Também porque é, requer que a gente olhe para a nossa própria prática de forma crítica, e de forma vulnerável também, né? Olhando para o jeito que a gente faz, e se a gente está de fato reproduzindo esse sistema ou não, ou se a gente está buscando fazer dentro das possibilidades de formas diferentes, de forma que realmente reflita quem a gente é, os valores que a gente cultiva nas nossas organizações e como a gente comunica também esses aprendizados, esses resultados. Medir de uma forma diferente é político também porque é complexo, e acho que abraçar complexidade é uma questão política, né? Se recusar a simplificar demais as questões que a gente trabalha, o que a gente faz, é político. E também pelo fato de que normalmente não são doadores que nos pedem para fazer isso, e porque isso parte de nós, porque esses questionamentos partem de nós, isso é também político, né? A gente trazer para a mesa, a gente querer pautar o que importa medir é político. E tem tudo a ver também com filantropia comunitária, né? Acho que tem outras parcerias aqui, outras pessoas de organizações que trabalham com esse tema. Tem tudo a ver com isso, porque questionar monitoramento e avaliação, questionar a forma que a gente faz, enfim, também nos encoraja a alocar recursos de forma que realmente importa para as nossas comunidades e para nossas organizações. Eu vou compartilhar um pouquinho da experiência que a gente tem pensado na rede né, nesse período, muito para trazer inspiração, talvez compartilhar mais perguntas. Eu não sei se vocês vão co- colher respostas, modelos, coisas replicáveis, né, do que eu vou compartilhar, mas com certeza inspiração e talvez perguntas que podem ser úteis para continuar amadurecendo essas questões, esses debates, que são questões que a gente está sempre aprendendo, né? Sempre se moldando, sempre aprendendo uns com outros. Então, eu queria focar na nossa experiência com relação a engajamento de membros. Como eu falei, nós somos uma rede nacional de organizações. No momento, a gente tem 17 organizações, muito diversas dentro da rede. Então, tem algumas que são muito grandes e estão em todo o território nacional no Brasil. Tem outras que são menores, estão localizadas em um território específico, em uma comunidade específica. E lidar com toda essa complexidade é bastante desafiador, né, dentro da rede, quando a gente fala de engajamento de membros, de engajamento da rede. E é um tema essencial para a nossa sustentabilidade enquanto rede, para a nossa existência, para a nossa resistência dentro do ecossistema filantrópico. É muito importante que membros estejam engajados, se conectem uns com outros, compartilhem ideias, compartilhem objetivos de incidência, enfim, nesses espaços. E a gente percebia que, por exemplo, os nossos doadores, quando a gente fala em engajamento, né, da rede, eles se interessam pelo número de participantes em cada encontro que a gente faz, se interessam pelos dados demográficos, essas coisas que vocês já trouxeram, né? E eu acho que a gente começou a questionar internamente uma coisa que muito importante que também já surgiu aqui nessa discussão inicial que a gente teve, que é a questão do aprendizado. O que a gente quer aprender sobre o engajamento dos membros entre si e com a rede? E assim como outros temas complexos, né, que envolvem o nosso trabalho, como confiança, dignidade, resiliência, influência, como disse a Nor também, são coisas muito difíceis de medir, são coisas difíceis de quantificar. Como que a gente mostra para um doador que a gente aumentou a confiança entre, por exemplo, se a gente é uma fundação comunitária, entre as comunidades que a gente apoia e a nossa equipe, por exemplo? Como que a gente prova que a gente aumentou a resiliência climática de uma comunidade? Como que a gente prova que a gente tem um engajamento sólido dentro da rede, que também é uma questão complexa de medir. E aí, por isso, acho que partir da pergunta o que queremos aprender enquanto equipe, para nós foi bastante importante. Entender, por exemplo, a gente entender o que queria aprender, o que engajamento realmente significa para nós, enquanto rede. Para além das participações quantitativas, para além das coisas que a gente já mede para reportar para doadores, por exemplo, a gente aprendeu que para nós o engajamento tem a ver com incidência, tem a ver com intercâmbios, tem a ver com apropriação de agendas, tem a ver com questões ainda mais complexas do que o que estava refletido nos indicadores, né? A gente também queria aprender como cada membro se engaja com a rede, então ter esse olhar também é importante ter um olhar geral, né? Mas também tem um olhar um pouco mais específico e cuidadoso, assim, para cada membro que atua dentro da rede. Olhar também para o que impacta esse engajamento de membros, entender como acolher momentos, limitações, possibilidades de cada membro dentro da rede, entender que cada membro são organizações compostas por pessoas também que têm expectativas, que têm limitações, que têm desejos, enfim, então como que isso tudo se entrelaça com o nosso engajamento. E acho que além do que aprender, uma outra pergunta importante também é que pressupostos a gente tem quando a gente pensa nesse tema, para além do que a gente já mede atualmente, que pressupostos a gente já tem que não estão necessariamente inseridos na forma que a gente mede. Então, por exemplo, dentro da rede, a gente percebe que mudanças nas equipes dos membros impactam o engajamento dos membros com a gente. A gente percebe que quanto mais pessoas de cada membro a gente tem engajado em diferentes espaços e canais dentro da rede, a gente tem um engajamento mais sólido, mais aprofundado. Então, essas eram coisas que a gente percebeu que já existiam e que a gente integrou na nossa forma de olhar para o engajamento internamente. E a partir disso, como que a gente pode aprofundar o engajamento da rede? De forma que é significativa, que é relevante para nós, que fortalece a nossa sustentabilidade. E notem que todas essas perguntas que eu apresentei para vocês, que são coisas que a gente constantemente questiona, não tem a ver com chegar a um objetivo específico, quantitativo, de porcentagens ou de números, não necessariamente, né? Tem a ver com chegar em aprendizados que importam para nós e que aprimoram o nosso trabalho de gestão de rede, nosso trabalho de incidência, especialmente dentro do ecossistema filantrópico. E aí a gente questionando tudo isso, chegou na ideia de chamar engajamento, na verdade, de comunidade. Para nós, a ideia de criar indicadores de comunidade, olhar para a questão de comunidade como um todo, faz muito mais sentido do que olhar apenas para engajamento. Engajamento tem muito mais a ver com participação em encontros, em eventos, reuniões, campanhas, beleza, faz parte. Mas a gente percebeu que não é só o que compõe o engajamento com os membros que a gente quer fomentar mesmo é uma ideia de comunidade, um grupo de organizações unido em um espaço por agendas comuns, com características similares, que se sustenta, que se apoia, que tem acesso uns a outros, que colabora em torno dessas agendas comuns. Isso tem tudo a ver com o nosso nome, né? Nós nos chamamos como A justamente pela ideia de comunidade. Então, acho que resgatar essa essência foi muito importante para nós em pensar o que importa quando a gente vai medir o engajamento de membros, né, com a rede. E aí, a partir disso, a gente chegou a indicadores que representam a ideia de comunidade para nós. Então, a gente separou os indicadores, não vou entrar muito em detalhes aqui sobre isso, mas para vocês terem uma ideia, a gente separou indicadores em dois eixos principais. Um primeiro de participação e um segundo de incidência. Participação para nós tem tudo a ver com participação interna, né, em nossos eventos, intercâmbios pontuais entre membros, as colaborações que membros fazem com os canais internos de comunicação que a gente tem, e incidência para abarcar tudo que tem a ver com iniciativas externas, que partem dessa participação interna, mas que tem tudo a ver com o engajamento e com a comunidade que a gente está fomentando dentro da rede. Então, aí a gente inclui alianças que se formam dentro da rede, que são um aspecto fundamental para a sustentabilidade, para o engajamento nessas agendas, campanhas de comunicação e assim por diante. E uma coisa que é muito interessante, uma reflexão que a gente estava tendo esses dias, é que a linguagem que a gente usa para falar desses indicadores, para nomear o que a gente está medindo, também é muito importante. No começo, quando a gente começou a pensar sobre isso, o nome proposto para pensar o eixo 2 de incidência era expansão. Olhem que interessante. A gente pensou no nome expansão meio que automaticamente, porque para nós expansão tem a ver com visibilidade, tem a ver com tudo que está para além do nosso alcance ali imediato, o que a gente constrói, o que a gente bota para fora. Só que no sistema que a gente vive, né, dentro de monitoramento e avaliação, nesse setor que a gente vive, expansão tem a ver com escala, com crescimento, com replicabilidade, que não era o que a gente queria dizer. Então, para nós foi importante pensar, opa, não é isso que a gente quer dizer, a gente quer incidência, é o que nos representa melhor. Então, acho que tomar esse cuidado com a linguagem, como a Jenny falou no começo, né, para não reproduzir sem querer, sem perceber, esse sistema que a gente está tentando lutar contra e que a gente está tentando fazer diferente, né? Então, a importância da linguagem também foi muito relevante para nós. E também sempre lembrar que esse é um trabalho constante, né, de aprendizado constante. Não é que uma vez que a gente se fez essas perguntas e respondeu, pronto, entendemos tudo, agora sabemos como medir, tá tudo certo, vamos conseguir comunicar com os doadores, enfim. Não é assim que funciona, né? Acho que essa pergunta do que nós queremos aprender, ela continua, porque mesmo depois que a gente reelaborou os indicadores, criou esses dois eixos com uma linguagem que fazia sentido para nós e tudo mais, surgiram novas perguntas do que a gente poderia aprender a partir disso, a partir desse todo esse processo. Então, surgiram novos fatores também para ficar mais complexa ainda a questão, e a gente foi aos poucos abraçando essas coisas e entendendo o que a gente pode aprender a partir daqui, etapa por etapa, né? E acho que o que é importante dizer também, que é um aprendizado importante para nós, e acredito que para todo mundo que está aqui, é que apesar de esse processo trazer mais perguntas e a gente ficar com muita vontade de querer aprender mais, de questionar mais, de aprofundar mais, a gente tem limitações, né? De recursos, de tempo, de energia. Não dá para fazer um estudo super aprofundado sobre tudo que realmente importa. Então, acho que é importante também priorizar e acolher as nossas limitações ao longo do processo, né? Entender que nem sempre um doador vai compreender a necessidade disso e vai dar um recurso específico para a gente seguir aprendendo. Seria maravilhoso, seria incrível, inclusive para os doadores que estão na sala. É muito importante para nós, para o nosso desenvolvimento institucional, profissional, enfim, em vários âmbitos. Mas é importante acolher essas limitações e trabalhar com o que a gente já tem da melhor forma possível. Usar as ferramentas e as tecnologias que a gente já tem, seja, enfim, um drive, as planilhas simples que a gente já usa, que a gente já acompanha, podem nos trazer insights, né, e aprendizados muito importantes já. Então, acho que partir do que já existe, partir do que já tem, partir dos questionamentos que já nos movem, é bem importante. E aí, para caminhar para o fim aqui, eu falei no começo que a gente não foi motivado necessariamente por um pedido de um doador, né, para fazer todas essas perguntas, reformular como a gente está olhando para a questão da comunidade, que agora vocês entendem que a gente olha comunidade não necessariamente só a questão do engajamento. A gente partiu de perguntas que importavam para nós, enquanto organização e para a nossa comunidade. E o nosso compromisso é horizontal, né? É com a equipe que trabalha junto conosco, é com os membros que fazem parte da rede. Não é um compromisso apenas vertical com os membros, de fazer prestação de contas, de atender aos seus pedidos, assim. E a gente chegou a mencionar esse processo que a gente fez de aprendizado, enfim, para alguns doadores. A gente não detalhou os dados que a gente coletou, os resultados quantitativos, a gente escolheu focar nos aprendizados na hora de se comunicar com doadores, justamente para que eles possam perceber a importância que tem a gente ter espaço e recursos e tempo para olhar para essas coisas de forma aprofundada e qualitativa mesmo, para a gente conseguir comunicar esses aprendizados e, a partir desses aprendizados, melhorar ainda mais a nossa gestão em rede e a nossa incidência, que no fim das contas é o objetivo principal, né, de sermos uma rede, de termos nos unido. E eu acho que queria terminar com esse comprometimento de aprendizado constante, de colocar essas lentes do medir o que importa, de refletir criticamente sobre o nosso próprio trabalho, de aproveitar talvez pequenas janelas, oportunidades de trazer esses questionamentos para doadores, porque acho que é importante também que eles estejam engajados nesses temas, para que de fato o que a gente mede, a forma que a gente mede e a forma que a gente comunica o que mede possa refletir a mudança que a gente quer causar, não só nos nossos territórios, nas nossas organizações, mas também no sistema que a gente está inserido, de filantropia, de desenvolvimento, enfim. Para medir o que importa, a gente precisa constantemente nos perguntar o que a gente quer aprender, por que isso importa, para quem importa, e como a gente cria as ferramentas e os processos que reflitam o que realmente importa, respeitando as nossas limitações no momento e acolhendo possibilidades, acolhendo futuros questionamentos, entendendo que isso é um processo constante. E aí, para fechar, só lembrar os princípios, né, de medir o que importa. deve ser útil, deve ser adaptável, deve trazer inspiração em vez de replicabilidade ou padronização, e tem que ser empoderador, digamos assim, para as pessoas, para as comunidades que a gente serve, para as organizações. E acho que chacoalhar as estruturas de poder aí dentro do sistema que a gente está inserido. É isso que eu tinha para compartilhar. Bem animada para escutar o César e vocês também.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yasmin. What now you may be thinking, okay, but this is a network, it's a membership organization in Brazil working on local philanthropy, advancing social justice, rights. You know, I'm not like that. I'm not in that part of the system, but I think some of the messages that was in what Yasmin shared are really relevant to all of us. Firstly, what I love about Comwa as a network is that the job of learning and measuring does not belong with one person. It's an organization wide. So we could have had Yasmin, her colleague Jonathan, her colleague Graciela, all of them could have spoken with equal confidence and energy about this topic of learning. And I think there's something for us to learn about that this shouldn't just be the job of one person. I love the challenging of all the assumptions around the logic on which a lot of monitoring and evaluation systems are based about whose knowledge, where the expertise lies, where resources come from. The recognition that measurement is political and that simplification itself is political, I think is really important for us. This is not a neutral terrain. I love the word inspiration that you use several times, that this should be what drives, this is the fuel and the engine of what drives our work, right? And I think there's something incredibly powerful about when Yasmin said, we work out what we want to learn. It's not just in the context of a single project. And I wonder if all of us couldn't just get better at engaging with external funders saying, okay, you need to know that, but this is what matters to us. Let's negotiate about how we balance between what matters to us in the long term and what matters to you in the short term. And I think so much of what you said resonates with what Kamala, who is on this call from Indonesia, said earlier in the call today, and in her presentation when she was talking about the evaluation learning system that they've developed within Indonesia for Humanity. She made 4 points. So excuse me, Kamala, for taking your words. So they've come up with a system called pemaknaan, which is a way to preserve our dignity and authenticity through language and process. So I think the issue of language, to affirm and regenerate our movement's collective energy and autonomy. Let's celebrate and harness what we know and what we see, to liberate ourselves from ways and means that perpetuate our own subordination and disempowerment. Let's understand how he who determines what gets measured also limits our imaginations if we're not careful, and our ambitions. And finally, she said, to act on the determination to carve new spaces and modalities in the belief that a different world is possible, in that sense that we can do better and we can find ways to do better. So it's just lovely to hear this articulation from the other side of the world. We started in Indonesia, and I think, Yaz, you kind of played that back to us from a very different context, but very similar kind of spirit. We're going to turn now to Kenya. So we're just going to loop across the other side of the world. And we're going to turn to Cesar Ngule, who is with the Kenya Community Development Foundation. Now, KCDF is one of the sort of original community philanthropy organizations in Africa. Cesar, I'd love to hear from you. If you could share a little bit about KCDF, the fact that donors for you includes communities as well as external donors, and a bit about the journey that you've been on in trying to measure what matters to you as an organization. Cesar, over to you, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that opportunity. I'll try to be very quick. Yes, I work for an organization called Kenya Community Development Foundation that is based in Kenya, East Africa.
Peter, can you switch your camera on, or are you feeling shy?
Yes. Sorry about that. Yes. So I come from an organization called the Kenya Community Development Foundation that is based in East Africa. And we sit in the nexus. Actually, we kind of sometimes define ourselves as a community foundation. We are. Sometimes we operate as an intermediary, sometimes we operate as a donor, and all those characteristics are what defines us as an organization, not just one box. And so what that has uniquely given us is the opportunity to experience all the worlds and all the perceptions and the challenges. And so I'll just use a few insights to share what has been our experience. But before I go there, and because I know my colleague Ricardo has already given a bit of we've already gone through a bit of background on the elephant from a different perspective. You'll allow me to kind of define and agree that measurement is really political, but is also used as a tool of domination. And I think one of the things is that, and again, if you go to, we have a saying, or there's even I think probably when you do something for long, you get conditioned to think that is the only thing, that is the only way that is right. Some of you would be familiar with the allegory of the dark cave by Plato, where if you tie a chicken for long and you untie it, probably it will just sit there. And for me, I think that's what defines measurement from a donor's perspective, that a lot of the times is that we do it, and most of those reports are kept in the files for most of the times and not necessarily actioned. But let me shift gear again and quickly run to the perspective and perceptions of communities. I dare say, if you were to do a lie detector for many local grassroots frontline organizations where they have to have dedicated professionals and spend a lot of budgets running after numbers and indicators and trying to understand this thing called sequence of change. If you were to ask them whether they would do that if the money was theirs, they would not. Because then that is not the only way they have at their disposal to measure change and to measure progress. And so what the system tends to do is to try and generate data for somebody else seated in Washington or somewhere else to convince them that your money was used well. And so again, it goes back to what, I don't know whether it was Ricardo or Jenny, what again, the complexities that are introduced because of lack of trust. And so while I know we are dealing with a very complex animal that can fight back, that it's just appreciating that the problem is not the measurement itself. It is the entire ecosystem to which we have found ourselves measuring now. So that I become a little bit more practical. One of the things that we do at KCTF. So over the years, we at times have to hire professionals and be complex. So we live, it's a lived experience in terms of servicing that system that requires you to spend to list 10 indicators to define something that you can see, something that you can share in a simple story, something that you can share a simple photo and see, something that you have a lived experience that it has worked. But what tends to happen, one of our programs, because then one of our programs that we've been running for quite a while and which is anchored to who we are as KCTF, has been trying to ensure that we promote local philanthropy, local giving, and try to create pots of money and enhance work with communities so that communities raise pots of money that where they have a little bit of more flexibility for those resources. And so when that happens, then it gives them a little bit of more confidence And what we've learned over the years is that for such programs where communities are raising money and we are layering our own funding from external, and where we have aligned funders, we are able to convince funders that one principle of one benefit of local fundraising is that communities tend to do and to program around their biggest, most urgent, most pressing priority, and they tend to use the resources very well. And so, using such arguments, sometimes we are able to convince funders to also allow us to measure it on the premise of what the partners would want. And so in our solicitations, or when we are getting into partnership, we'll just ask partners, what do you want to measure? As opposed to having a very elaborate definition and call for proposal. Because at the end of the day, the first thing is that the definition and the decision to intervene in a certain area, the decision to decide that they are going to construct a health center, or they are going to do public awareness because people are cutting trees in the neighboring forest. That decision is there. So they have crafted the agenda, they have crafted what they want to work on, they have crafted what they are pitching for resources from the local community. So if you layer and you ask them, how will you know success? What will success look like for you? Then you are able to come up with indicators, and how will you collect evidence for your success? And so once you learn how to follow the language of the partners, most of the time it has been 1, 2, or 3 things. I've never seen a list of 10 indicators in such instances. But all those projects, I also can't remember any project that has been a white elephant or that has never been successful. Because what then the communities tend to do is that they will tell you that they begin giving you examples like success for us is our ability not to walk 10 kilometers to go and fetch water. Or our definition of we want to share that story, that success, by documenting or writing our story or sharing our story. So for me, I think there's nothing wrong with measurement. The problem is the political nature of measurement when it is used to serve the interests of others, but not the interests of community. So if you can have a framework or a funding framework that layers on what communities are doing, and that demystifies the originator of how you would need, or how you know success has happened, then probably things would change. Because if I am the person, or if I am the organization that is doing the work, if I am the organization that is doing the campaigns, if I am the organization that is doing the construction, if it is an infrastructure project, then I am the person who really appreciates and understands how change would look like. Otherwise, that for me would be my brief sharing, to just again re-emphasize the centrality of local resources in changing the narrative and the metrics of measurement. And when those metrics of measurements change, they will be aligned to the local capacity. You will not have the instances where because you want to measure for somebody in Washington, then you a very simple community that was doing their own things, all of a sudden you have to hire somebody with a master's or with a degree in monitoring and evaluation. Then you have to hire people in finance. Then after 4 years, you have again to begin from scratch, or you are transformed to who you were not, to the person or to the entity or to the organization that you were not meant to be. So how can funding complement the measurement needs of our communities and not the other way around? Thank you. Obrigada.
Obrigada. Thank you. Obrigada, Cesar. Thank you, Cesar. So that we're going to open it up for conversation in a minute, but I love Cesar's first point, which is, hey, we're everything. We don't exist in a single category. We're a funder, we're a community foundation, we're a recipient, we're an intermediary, and there's nothing like walking around in those different shoes to be on the receiving end of power, and also to start as a good way to understand how one's power can work. You know, when you feel like you have power because everyone in the room agrees with you, and that previously they might not have done, then you have to kind of stop and think about that. I love Caesar's point too around the decisions communities might make if the money was theirs, might be different. Actually, we created conditions where there's a kind of gaming behavior where you anticipate what the response is meant to be. So you think, well, I'll tell you this because I think you expect me to say this. And how, when people are actually putting their own resources on the table, the decisions may be very different. And in my experience of working with community philanthropy organizations or organizations that are building local support bases for their works over the years, there is nothing will keep you more accountable than having local donors. Like the worry about compliance and accountability and distrust, but having a local constituency who can walk into your office at any point and say, what did you do with that money? That will keep you accountable. And yet somehow that emerging kind of practice and system where communities can mobilize resources, they can be complemented by external resources, is somehow still so invisible to the dominant system where we just assume that there is a single input and it's a single donor and it will buy a single result, and not looking at the field in which that seed has been planted. So thank you for that provocation. So I think now kind of in this last 20 minutes or so of the conversation to start thinking about, so what do we do with this? I think already I'm starting to feel like we've got a lot of the tools, we've got the interest. Actually, how do we start moving this forward? So I can see Ola Jumoke has got your hand up. Would you like to say something? And then the floor is open for others to contribute too, but please go ahead.
Yeah, so good afternoon, good morning,
Hello.
depending on your time zone. So I work with Core Africa, and we support volunteers in the various communities in 9 countries across Africa. And I'm happy, so I'm just going to write on what Caesar has said. I think one of the great things I've seen from this is that there's a need to bring the South, that's the global South and the global North together. Having this kind of discussion will greatly help. And I think that has been lacking. And just running through the participants, you hardly see a lot of people from the global South. So I think we can do more in terms of creating awareness for this kind of discourse to happen, and so that all of us can, we learn from each other, and then we're able to push this agenda forward. Having said that, one of the things that Cesar mentioned is the fact that, yes, you have to maybe engage consultants and all that. But then the question and the point still is, who holds the power? Who holds the purse? And the person holding the purse is actually the person dictating the tune. And that's what has been happening. So for us in Core Africa, what we're trying to do is to also get Africans to become donors, philanthropy, raise people within Africa who are donating, to African cause. And then for you to be able to have a say, so to speak, so you have a voice, you have your agency, and you can talk about the things that happen and how you actually measure, some of those things in the communities. We've had struggles also trying to understand how do we measure the work that we do, especially if they're in the communities. We tell stories as Africans, we have all those ideas about how it should be done. But then again, because you're not the one holding the purse, which is a key factor, you're not the one holding the purse. The person holding the purse says, I want it done this way. So how do you maneuver around that and ensure that you're actually able to meet the expectation of the person holding the purse and also balance your own expectation of, oh, I want to tell my story differently. And this is the crux of the matter. So one way, which I said, is we're trying to see how we can also encourage philanthropy. But at the same time, in measurement also, I've been in monitoring and evaluation for years. And one of the things is that there's a place for this storytelling. There's also a place for the quantitative. So it's marrying the two together, and then ensuring that, you don't say one is totally better than the other, So yeah, the politics is there, but at the same time, you also want to be able to marry the two, because also what gives you the context is the measurement, the stories, and all the things that go around it, that provides the context, even when you're using your data and all that. So I think that there's a place for both. But then again, yes, we've had too much of a shift, from the global north, dictating and telling us this is how to do it. But the South also needs to wake up, wake up its own, in the sense that you need to also be able to mobilize resources. You need to be able to also think, outside the box. How can we do this in a way that if I'm working in 9 countries, for instance, then somebody tells a story that success for me is not being able to walk, to fetch water, at a long distance. Yes, it's good, it's interesting, it tells, but how do I also be able to standardize this across 9 countries, which is something that I struggle with. If I have to tell all the stories, but I don't have a quantitative way of also telling the story, So I think both actually can go together. And then, it's just getting people to understand that it's not just the quantity, but yes, the quality is also good, because it brings out the lived experiences, the emotions, the depth, of what we're, all the collective efforts and achievements and all that. It just gives flesh and a richness to what we're doing, So that's just my humble contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Olajumoke. That's that reminder that this actually starts with us. I think that this was the conclusion of this morning's meeting, which was taking control of our own destiny as the first step. And the point you're making around, if we really want to kind of drive community-driven development, it starts with us, with local contribution, with development not just being this chilly, bureaucratic, multi-million thing that happens to communities, but actually, how do we start to weave between the power of resources within a community and how, as Caesar said, the external resources can land on that fertile territory? Because I think we know in the context of any humanitarian disaster, the first responders are always local communities. It's always the local contribution, providing a meal, the providing money, the providing somewhere for a bed for the night. And yet somehow, and this is what we know to be the case, and yet somehow it gets written out of the story. We're not able to hold those two truths alongside each other. And the challenge really, I think, as you suggested, is actually how do we start to weave between these different systems of kind of vertical and horizontal accountability, and who determine, and what's the weight, the balance of which matters more than another. Any other thoughts or contributions on this so far? I don't know if Barry, you wanted to say, well, you facilitated this morning's conversation. I don't know, do you want to remind us some of the comments that came out of that?
Yeah, I'll just put my camera on to prove I'm not sleeping alongside Donald Trump.
I did worry. I did wonder. I was going to ask you.
Well, the parallels between the two conversations are, I think, quite extraordinary. I mean, the point you just made about the power of actually choosing to go your own way in this, I think, was evident very, very clearly this morning. And that is the most important step, is to decide, I think, that you are in control of your own destiny when it comes to measuring what matters, rather than slavishly following somebody who is outside your situation, because it's quite clear that from the the descriptions that we've had today, that the local culture really matters in terms of measuring what matters. I mean, every context is different. I mean, the KCDF and and Conwy are working in different continents. They're working on different kinds of topics, although, you know, there's some commonality, but actually rooting the understanding of what's happening in deep processes that are unique to the situation is actually vital. So we can't have a kind of system of any kind which is so superimposed on the top of all that. It has to be made up from the ground up, and that's the way it should be, because in a sense, you know, the field has a tendency to kind of to sort of tip its hat to the elites, the people with the money, rather than the people who actually really matter, who are the local people who are, you know, actually are involved in these initiatives. I think the other thing that is very similar to me is actually the way that people are really approaching this with gusto. People are, you know, it's really an energizing conversation. I think that says, you know, that connects something with what you've said, Jenny, which is, you know, this is really this is the bit where it really matters. This is the thing that we're doing. How do we actually understand the achievements that we're making? There is no organization that I've ever come across which is not interested in working out whether what it's doing is working. And that can only be done by the organization itself, consulting the people with whom it's working with and understanding that. And I think, in a sense, what I would like to see is more of what we're getting to here. You know, there are I don't know how many, there's 98 people on this call now. There were over 100 at one stage. We had, as you said, 86 this morning. That's a very big slice between us. We can really begin to change the language. And if we actually use the opportunity that these sessions are giving to actually build a new common sense and actually get better understandings of what's happening in communities, then that's an obvious kind of win for all concerned, including the funders. And one suspects that funders impose systems because some expensive consultant has told them to do it this way. And as you know, Yasmin's contribution, you know, basically said that linear things do not work in situations of complexity. Almost by definition, one cannot cut a line through a blancmange and make a kind of any sense out of it. There are so many moving parts in all of what you're doing that it really needs the nuance and kind of complexity, the embracing of complexity that we've heard from the two presenters, but also from people in the, you know, on the webinar who have contributed. I just think it's really evident that we do have all the skills we need to do this within our field. We don't need to import, you know, external expertise into this. We can really do this ourselves. So I'm very encouraged by this conversation, as I was with this morning. And I think putting the two together, you know, we can really move on and really begin to change things from here. It's growing ahead of steam that we really need to kind of move on. So really good.
Thanks, Barry. Isabel, I'm going to come to you in a second, but just to encourage others who are perhaps Portuguese or Spanish speakers to join in, and also to acknowledge that we're still doing this kind of English, Spanish, Portuguese translation-y thing. But, you know, maybe for you know, that maybe we need the next logical step is to start having these conversations in people's own native languages and starting to see how we can, you know, both go deep in language and keep coming back together so that we keep sharing the knowledge. So I just want to acknowledge that. But Isabel, I think, over to you. Our hand is up. Yes. Are you Isabel or Isabella?
Boa tarde. Boa tarde. Eu vou falar em português. Eu sou Isabel.
Great.
Vivo em Moçambique. Estou a gostar muito das discussões, são muito produtivas. E o que é mais interessante é que estamos a falar em línguas locais, cada qual fala a sua língua, fica mais à vontade. E é isso que também traz esta vontade também no campo, quando nós trabalhamos com as comunidades, em que nós usamos muito a língua local. Quando estamos nas comunidades, nem sempre temos que falar o nosso português, temos que deixar que a comunidade fale a língua que ele sente mais à vontade, para ele partilhar a sua experiência, a sua história. E isso está a mostrar mesmo hoje, nesse nosso encontro, que é fundamental olhar a língua de cada país. Primeiramente, nós como estamos a implementar um projeto filantrópico, este projeto não só é gratificante para as comunidades, mas para nós mesmos, para mostrar o quanto é importante valorizar o nosso conhecimento, o nosso tempo, as nossas habilidades, são recursos locais. E esses recursos locais, quando são valorizados por nós mesmos, dão-nos mais valor, dão-nos esse nosso poder, esse nosso shift de power que estamos constantemente a falar, é que nos traz esse poder. E uma das coisas que eu acho que nós podemos fazer é ver como é que este conhecimento da comunidade pode ser, não é bem traduzido, mas ser valorizado por esses doadores de uma forma um pouco diferente. Porque um doador, qualquer um de nós pode ser um doador, mas o doador já tem sua linhagem, já tem suas regras, tem seus parâmetros. Estamos a falar de alguns resultados, que é outcome, output, que ele já coloca ali quando nós temos no sistema de monitoria. Como é que isto é transmitido para a comunidade? Como é que a comunidade se sente em relação a esses indicadores? Tendo em conta que existem outros indicadores que nós podemos descobrir à medida que estamos a implementar as atividades. À medida que estamos a trabalhar com a comunidade, vamos descobrir que nem tudo que está no papel é realmente aquilo que nós encontramos na comunidade. Porque não podemos esquecer que existem valores dentro da comunidade. Estamos a falar de cultura, religião. Então, como é que isto é feito olhando para aquilo que nós já trazemos, que é o que o doador diz que okay, tem que ser feito assim. Então, há uma necessidade de ter um diálogo participativo em que as comunidades são envolvidas. Antes de nós implementar algo, temos que envolver a comunidade, participar de diálogo participativo em que ele fala abertamente. E essencial é aquilo que nós deixamos. Nós estamos a implementar algo que o doador quer, mas o que a comunidade precisa é muito mais do que aquilo que a gente pensa. Então, este diálogo participativo tem que estar sempre no nosso notebook, exercise book, e sempre nos nossos planos, primeiramente, que é valorizar primeiro a opinião da própria comunidade, fazer perceber que eles podem mudar, eles podem muito bem desenvolver, porque lá dentro da comunidade já tem habilidade, já tem esse conhecimento, e cada um pode doar um pouco daquilo que tem. E isto é muito gratificante. A outra coisa que eu acho que nós podemos fazer é ver como é que o diálogo participativo pode ser envolvido ou pode ser conduzido em diferentes camadas. Nós estamos a falar de jovens, os jovens têm sua opinião. Estamos a falar de adultos, então tem diferentes níveis. Quando estamos a falar com jovens, qual é o tipo de diálogo que tem que ser feito? Como é que o jovem deve participar? Nós estamos a falar da juventude. Em Moçambique, a maior parte da camada da população é jovem. Então, como é que o jovem pode participar? Quais são as ideias? Como é que ele pode estar inserido neste diálogo participativo? E quando estamos a falar de adulto, estamos a falar de mulheres. Qual é a opinião da mulher? Esta mulher que muitas das vezes ela sofre calada, sobretudo aqui em Manica, em Chimoio, porque este projeto é ser implementado em Chimoio, assim como em Maputo. Existe um aspecto que as mulheres, muitas das vezes, a voz não sai, porque elas ficam com medo de falar. Como é que a mulher pode falar? Como é que a mulher pode participar nesse diálogo? Como é que ela pode mostrar que ele tem o poder também de colocar as suas opiniões e que as suas opiniões sejam ouvidas? Então, há uma necessidade de nós vermos essas todas as camadas quando nós fizemos esse diálogo participativo. E não podemos esquecer um pouco em relação às questões do governo, o governo local. Estamos a dizer que, em algum momento, algumas intervenções podem ter dificuldade de serem implementadas por causa, das vezes, das políticas que são usadas. Então, isto tudo é muito importante quando nós estamos a implementar um projeto e que o doador, às vezes, está à espera de um resultado, em que nós temos esses todos os aspectos para analisar. Estamos a falar de lobby. O lobby é feito em todas as camadas. Estamos a falar de diferentes stakeholders, estamos a falar também de alguns, como chama, parceiros, estamos a falar de a própria comunidade. Então, como é que isto tudo é visto e é relevante para o sucesso de um projeto? É mais ou menos isso que eu gostaria de dizer, que não existe uma coisa linear, não existe que, olha, para nós lidarmos com o doador vai ser assim, não existe. Tudo depende muito das condições de cada local e cada país é cada país. O que nós podemos fazer é sentar um diálogo conjunto e partilharmos o que nós temos, as histórias de diferentes pontos, e aí talvez podemos ter uma linhagem igual e andamos no mesmo patamar, mas sobretudo valorizar primeiro a comunidade. E esse projeto de Gift for Change vem mostrar que existe uma necessidade da comunidade começar a valorizar os seus recursos. Hoje nós estamos a depender de alguns doadores, mas são esses que em algum momento também sofrem algumas guerras, ora porque há cheias, porque há mudanças climáticas. Então, por que agora nós podemos valorizar, despertar esse interesse, que é importante nós valorizarmos o que nós temos para que a gente desenvolva? O poder está na comunidade. Nós temos o poder. E o sucesso começa comigo. Muito obrigada por esta oportunidade. Queria partilhar um pouco isto. Obrigada por tudo. Obrigada.
Isabel, thank you. I didn't recognize your name, but Isabel from Makaya, once you started speaking, I knew who you were, and it's wonderful to have someone joining from Mozambique, which is a place where these kinds of conversations are really all still quite new, but it's sort of indicative of how, if we work together, we can accelerate. We don't have to be doing this on our own. In the last few minutes, I don't know, Kamala and Nana, are you still there? I know you spoke on the earlier call, but I wondered if you wanted just to make any comment on this second round of the webinar, and also to note the point that you made, B, in the chat around, you know, that if we really want to measure community change and these sorts of processes, that actually collectively we could advocate much better to our donors to say, this is the kind of measurement we really want to do. Put your resources in here, because this isn't necessarily the work that gets funded. So that the power of what is within our hands. Nana, are you there? Would you like to say a word, having been on this morning's call and having heard it sort of played out slightly differently, but with so many overlaps this afternoon or evening for you, or morning for some? Over to you, Nana.
Hi, hi, Jenny. Thank you so much for calling on me. It's been very, very interesting to hear all of the sharings in this evening session. It's an evening for me. I just want to say that, you know, it sounds that the intention is strong to really carve our own way and find or have the confidence. I think one of the most important things about starting something is to have that sense of confidence that comes from a collective space, that we can carve our own way, and that we can learn from each other and inspire each other, and that you know, hopefully we start with the principles that we believe in. We have a sense of direction of where we want to be, and then along the way or in between, maybe we can create some of the tools that that are meaningful and relevant for us. And you know, I can imagine over several years we could have a very rich diversity of not just general principles and ideas, but really something that's that can be applied and carried out as a system that we are creating, that comes from our own understanding of what is needed, and that common sense of direction. So I look forward to just the journey that we seem to be starting, and feel very confident that we have a very strong beginning. So that's all I can say, Jenny. Thank you.
Well, I don't know, it's like 10:30 for you or something. So well done for
Yes,
doing that. So thank you. Okay, Albert, let's have a last word from you. Albert, let's hear from you, and then we'll wrap up. Albert. Yes.
Oi, gente. Aqui já é boa tarde, praticamente. Eu vou falar em português porque é a única língua que eu consigo falar. Como tem tradução, dá para ouvir bem, né? Perfeito. Eu queria fazer uma pontuação rápida, me apresentando também, né? Eu sou aqui do Brasil, sou do Movimento de Trabalhadores Sem Teto e também sou bolsista atualmente da Rede Como A, do Programa Saberes, e tenho feito uma pesquisa assim, sobre um pouco de tudo, né? Sobre a alocação de recursos nessa parte dos movimentos sociais, comunitários de base. E daí, o que eu tenho ouvido muito nas minhas entrevistas e avaliações com essas organizações de base, os movimentos sociais, é sobre como, desde a concepção até a avaliação, o processo é muito engessado, né? O monitoramento, a avaliação, a concepção, tudo é muito engessado, é muito fechado em uma metodologia específica, e isso dificulta muito esse processo. Eu estava lendo um texto que o Jonatas da Rede Como A tinha escrito, que fala sobre o Instituto Sociedade e População da Natureza, o ISPN, que eles fizeram um projeto, que era o Traçando Novos Caminhos para o Bem Viver, que descentraliza essa questão e compartilha o poder, que colocou os povos indígenas, que eram os beneficiários desse projeto, para fazer o desenho, a implementação até o monitoramento. Eu acho que talvez também seja um pouco a minha pequena intervenção enquanto pessoa de movimento de base da comunidade, é que acho que a avaliação, acho que a Isabel tinha falado isso também, a avaliação é muito importante também que seja feita, a concepção do processo de avaliação seja feita por nós que estamos no movimento de base. Eu acho que muda um pouco a medição e talvez consiga medir esse impacto que importa se a gente conseguir medir em conjunto ou sozinhos, enfim, e aí analisar. Mas era um pouco também do que eu fiquei pensando enquanto eu ouvia as intervenções, e obrigado pelo espaço.
Thank you so much for that contribution. Oh, I can see Alexandra. Is there something you want to say in the last 30 seconds or so?
Yeah. Really quickly, I just wanted to share a short reflection. I'm Alexandra. I work at AWID, a feminist international NGO working in research and advocacy at the global, but we're a feminist movement support organisation. And I wanted to share that one of the key things that we're thinking a lot about. I realise I'm talking too fast for the interpreters. Apologies. One of the key things that we've been thinking about as we're undergoing our feminist journey is in this measuring change, and we've been crafting our own theory of change, which obviously acknowledges that change is not linear, that change is complex, and that change sometimes for our movement in the context of the strong anti-rights work that we are seeing, change sometimes means standing still and holding strong and resisting. And this is what we are struggling to be able to communicate to donors. When change actually doesn't mean change just means existence. Change just means preserving the rights that are constantly trying to be eroded away from us. So I wanted to share that as well, because It's something that we're struggling with in terms of thinking about how we communicate that. Obviously, we're trying to do. But how do we talk about change when change just means simply existing or resisting, standing still? And I wanted to say thank you so much for this space. It has been really inspiring.
Great, thank you so much, Alexander. You brought us to a perfect end. The previous intervention from Albert and then from you were really good. So I think, you know, this what Albert's point around, you know, we start from the bottom up. Are we talking about, you know, the spirit of the Shift the Power Summit was around a humanizing society, a good society in which people can live flourishing lives. It wasn't about how you move money from A to B. So this sort of tension between people-centered approach and a kind of bureaucratic, technocratic approach, which we seem to fall into so easily, which sometimes has a particular function, but has almost infected the whole way we think about this work. I think Alexandra's final point around in these times of crisis, you know, around the world where we're trying to hold on to those rights, how do we articulate that kind of preserving what is? And when we're working in the spaces of emergence, of slow processes of mindset shifts, sometimes I know in the work of the Global Fund for Community Foundations, I feel like I write the same thing every year because it's like it's slow work. We've moved a little bit, but what were you expecting? And to avoid falling into the trap of going, yes, it's all changed. So, but I think these conversations like this are such an important starting point because I hope you've come away from this realizing that we know much more collectively than we think we might. We are struggling with the same system. Amanda from USAID kicked off the conversation right from the start saying, I'm in USAID, the belly of the beast. And we're trying to figure it out. So it's like, how do we take the opportunity to find allies throughout the system, to start weaving the system that we want and the system that we need, and that puts people at the center and heart of it. So we'll be continuing this conversation. Thank you so much for all the speakers. Thanks to Yaz and to Caesar, for my colleagues for doing the translating support, to the translators, and also to the number of cats. Clearly, this is a cat topic, and we need to mobilize the feline population here because they're sitting here listening with all the answers, I have no doubt. But thank you so much. We'll be sharing the recording, and let's continue to stay in touch. I think the two directions that we're particularly looking at the Global Fund for Community Foundations is one, documenting, highlighting, elevating emergent practices, the kinds of tools and ways of working that Nana Kamala spoke about, and starting to engage with funders. How do we engage in more of a negotiation where we actually use our power to say, you can have measurement 1, 2, and 3 donor, but we will have 4, 5, 6, and 7, and actually start telling a different kind of a story. So thank you all for your participation. And look forward to seeing you again and continuing this incredibly rich conversation. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day, evening. Good night, Nana, in Indonesia. Bye-bye.